Yes.
Okay. Well, this story is about visiting grandchildren, but not my grandchildren. Many years ago, when I was newly graduated from college, I spent a year in India, and this is from then. Back in 1967, the Indian railways had ladies' compartments so that a woman traveling by herself would not be unprotected among strange men. Traveling across central India by myself, age 22, I sought out a third-class ladies' compartment and squeezed into the very last seat. Just before departure, a tiny little old lady came in, and amid cries of "no room, no room," she grinned at everybody and settled herself down with her little bundles on the floor in the middle of the compartment. After the train got underway, people started chatting with the strangers next to them. It's the custom there to address random older people as Ajji or Granny. So pretty soon somebody said, "Ajji, where do you live?" "Oh, with a grandchild." "Where's that?" "Oh, lots of places. I have lots of grandchildren, all different places." Oh. She named half a dozen towns in that state and said she was going now to stay with a grandson about 50 miles down the line that we were on, but she visited all of them one after another. She was a widow and had no place of her own. "Ajji, that's a lot of travel. How can you afford it?" "Afford it? The tickets are free." "How do you manage that?" "Oh, that's easy. I'm sitting in a compartment like this, and in comes a very young conductor, younger than my grandson. And he says, 'Ajji, where's your ticket?' And I say, 'Yes, conductor sahab, I will give it to you right away.' And I look at it. I look for it in my waistband, and it's not there. I look for it in my bundle, and it's not there. And I look in at my other bundle, and the tears are coming, and I'm crying. And the nice young conductor says, 'Ajji, I must put you off the train, or I will lose my job. But I will come back 2 stations from now and help you down.' So 3 stations later, he comes back and helps me down. And I wait for the next train." By this time, everyone in the compartment was listening and appreciating her story. Soon the conductor came by and everything happened exactly as she had said. First, he punched all of our tickets, finally got to her since she was sitting on the floor. She frantically looked in all her bundles, the tears flowing freely. Promising to return 2 stations later, he left. We all dug into our bundles for food to share with her. And then he came back as promised and helped her off the train. The last we saw of her, she was settling down on the platform with all her bundles, happily waving to us as the train pulled out. Someone had asked her if her grandson wouldn't be worried when our train arrived without her. She had laughed and said, "Oh, no problem. He doesn't know I'm coming." So that's it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Sandy. Well, next up, we have Evelyn Corsini. And I want to say that, you know, sometimes an experience can enter us kind of like a splinter, and a story can kind of help us have the opportunity to pull it out. Here's Evelyn Corsini with Trying to Protect a Child.
For years, I've wanted to share the experiences I had as a social worker in hospital pediatrics. This case has haunted me for a long time. To be sure that I was not betraying patient confidentiality, I checked online and found it was public information as it had been documented in the newspaper. The events happened at 2 points in time, 6 years apart. It began in the middle of the night when 8-year-old Mark Soma was brought to MGH. The medical record documented that Mark and his mother, Josephine, had arrived at MGH by ambulance from a hotel in downtown Boston. In the emergency department, Josephine reported Mark had progressive brain damage and that she had tried to perform a mercy killing by giving him an overdose of sleeping medication. Noise from his being sick and his mother's cries led hospital staff to become alarmed and call for an ambulance. In the ED, Mark was found to be medically stable and was admitted. A referral to social work was made to evaluate the family situation and recommend a safe discharge plan. Josephine was examined in the MGH acute psychiatric service and was transferred to a private psychiatric hospital north of Boston. I read Mark's medical record and talked with his nurse. He was a handsome, slightly chubby, dark-haired boy. I introduced myself and told him I knew from his doctors that he was medically okay and could be discharged. However, since his mother was not able to take him home, and she was his only legal guardian, I would need to meet with other members of his family and then talk to a judge at the Boston Juvenile Court to arrange for his discharge. I met with Josephine's sister, Mark's maternal aunt, for an interview. This is the story she told. They were an Italian Catholic family living together in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Josephine worked as a clerk for the State Department of Mental Health and had never married. Years ago, she took a vacation trip to Italy by herself. She did not return for 1 year. When she arrived home, baby Mark was with her. She said that she had become pregnant in Italy and traveled to Edinburgh, Scotland, where Mark was born. Back in Lawrence, she returned to work at the Department of Mental Health and continued to live with her family, who helped her to raise Mark. He was described as happy and healthy. At some point, his mother developed a concern that he had swallowed bubble bath containing hexachlorophene. She became fixed on the idea that this would cause progressive brain damage. Her belief continued over years, and she sought medical treatment for him. Doctors in Lawrence who saw Mark did not find anything wrong. Josephine felt he was getting worse and took him to Children's Hospital in Boston several times. The last visit was the previous day. Again, Josephine was told that there was nothing wrong with Mark. Instead of taking the commuter rail home to Lawrence, she and Mark checked into a hotel. Josephine bought a packet of sleeping tablets, which she gave to Mark, hoping they would end his life. The aunt knew that Mark was ready for discharge and wanted to take him home. I told her that I was obliged to report this incident to the Massachusetts Department of Social Service, the state agency that investigates child abuse. Since Josephine was Mark's only legal guardian, I would also need to go to the Boston Juvenile Court to ask for temporary custody of Mark to be assigned to a person who could approve his discharge. I called Lawrence DSS and they arranged to meet with Mark's family at their home later in the day. I walked to the court and met with the court clerk to file a care and protection petition for Mark. The judge heard the petition and ordered that temporary custody of Mark be given to DSS. He ordered a full investigation with the case to be heard in court again in 6 weeks. I made several phone calls to DSS and Mark's family and placed my report in his medical record. By the end of the day, DSS decided that he could safely leave with his aunt. I documented this and he was discharged to her. As the petitioner, I was notified and attended the follow-up court hearing. The judge awarded DSS continued temporary legal custody of Mark with the understanding that physical custody would remain with the aunt. The case was to continue under court supervision. My memory is that Josephine was resident at a state hospital at the time. That was the last I knew of Mark until 6 years later. While driving to work, I heard a radio news report of a woman, Josephine Soma, who had gone to the Methuen, Massachusetts police station early that morning with a gun, saying she had just killed her son while he was asleep in bed. I felt shocked and incredibly angry. I believe even now that this murder could have been prevented. Who had made the decision that it was safe for Mark to live with his mother? My theory all along was that Josephine had a fixed delusion, likely due to her guilt over the out-of-wedlock pregnancy. I believed that to this traditional Catholic woman, Mark was in essence the spawn of the devil. I believed her delusion would continue no matter what treatment was provided to her. I don't know when Mark returned to live with his mother or when they moved to Methuen, but it made sense to me that his mother had murdered him now at age 14 in early adolescence. I believed then and still do that his developing sexual maturation put him at increased risk of Josephine acting on her delusion. That's the end.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you, Evelyn. That's a heartbreaking story, but beautifully told. So thank you.
Thank you.
And, you know, stories, they have a power. And as the author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said, many stories matter. Stories can be used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. So it is important for us to hear stories of all kinds and from all people. So thank you, Evelyn. So our next storyteller is Irina Kareva, who has been part of the senior choir for many years now. Actually, she joined the church at almost the same time I did. So I've known her for a while, and it's wonderful to have her here with us. She's shared a couple stories with us in the past, and I look forward to this one. Irina has a story called Overcoming Bias.
Thank you, Ian. So I was never particularly interested in having kids. And whenever I would ask anyone about their parenting experience, they would say, oh, yes, it's great. It's the best thing in the world. But when you probe for specifics, people get strangely vague. So when my husband and I were deciding whether we are going to have kids, we decided that if we are going to have this human experience, we are going to do it right. And by right, we mean that we know that it is our responsibility to, yes, to prepare the child for the world, and also to make sure that he or she is loved and supported. And until we are ready to actually do the loving and the supporting and be actually interested in it, we're going to hire a professional. So when I was at the end of my pregnancy, we started interviewing nannies. We are very fortunate that we're actually able to do that and to afford that. We live in Brookline, so we posted an ad on the Brookline Babysitters Facebook page, and we got a lot of very wonderful candidates, mostly as if anybody here looked for a nanny, Brazilian women or a couple of Mexican women. And then there was one Muslim girl in a hijab. And she wrote a really, really cool application. She wrote a really interesting, good email. And she's educated, she has a master's. And we looked at the picture and we're like, maybe that. The thing is, so both my husband and I were Jewish. I mean, I am, as I like to say, Jewish. I didn't really grow up with any of the traditions. I didn't grow up with anything. I was born in Russia. What defined my mother's Jewishness is that she was discriminated against in Soviet Union, because that's what you do. And in general, I feel my Jewishness is largely externally defined. Like if they come for Jews, they'll come for me, regardless of what I've ever done in my life. And my husband, he comes from from a family that actually, for whom Jewishness is part of their identity. He went to Jewish school. His mother is a Holocaust survivor. So this is a serious, serious thing. And then we're considering this Muslim woman to come into our house, potentially live in our house, and take care of our child. We interviewed her just to be open-minded, and we loved her immediately. I mean, we were just really ready to offer her the job on the spot. But there is this nagging, there's a Muslim in my house. And so we sat down and we're like, okay, we are both aware that we are feeling prejudiced. This woman, she's done nothing to us. She has done nothing wrong. She feels like a perfectly wonderful candidate. And our reaction right now and our discomfort is completely from bias, from prejudice, from things that we acknowledge and then we don't act on. And so we decided, you know what? We're going to be woke. We're going to learn about Islam because frankly, we know nothing. We know, the only thing we know is that Muslims pray 5 times a day. So that's what we offered, like, do you need a prayer mat? She's like, I'm good, I'm good. And also we brought this up actually during our interview. We explicitly said, so we're Jewish, you're Muslim, is this gonna be a problem? And she responded beautifully. If it's not a problem for you, it's not a problem for me. And so this girl, so my son was born on March 11th, 2020, just before lockdown. And when I got home on March 13th, and that's when Ifer joined our home. So she initially wanted to live out because she had bad experiences with previous families. And like after a week, she calmed down. There was COVID. We have a spare room. And she was open enough and she moved in. So now, okay, we're gonna learn about Islam. We actually didn't end up doing much learning. So she was absolutely wonderful with our son, Simon. And then after about a month, what's an interesting thing started happening. Like I swear, we did not do anything. We were really genuinely very open-minded and we really genuinely wanted to learn. After about a month, she started thinking about taking off her hijab. She took it on when she was 15 or 16 years old, and she's 25 right now. So she wore it for 9 years. And if you take on a hijab, that's not a light thing to do. That is it's not like one day I can take on a hijab and the other one I don't wear it. No, this is a statement about commitment to religion, about commitment to certain values. And after a while, she started feeling that this is not like her anymore. I mean, she says that she has actually been thinking about this for a while. I absolutely believe that. But I guess living with us became a bit of a catalyst. So this was a gradual process. At first, for example, when Gideon would not be home, she would take off her hijab when I am around because women are allowed to see each other's hair. Then she got like a baseball cap and she wore it with a hoodie, but that's not a hijab anymore. So that happened for a couple of days. Then one time we actually went, like she was ready to actually go outside. She had on her little baseball cap and we walked to some store and I don't know, bought something simple and then walked on the street. And I asked her, how are you feeling? She said, naked. But it took a couple more weeks, but she eased into it. And so after about a month and a half, she was not wearing a hijab around our house anymore. And then a very interesting thing happened. So she took on a hijab when she was, as I said, about 15, 16. And when you put on a hijab, also society starts treating you differently. Even the society as generally, I guess, liberal as Turkey, she's Turkish, that's, yes, there is a mixture of people and women who both wear the hijab and not. And when you put on a hijab, even your society they start looking at you differently, you start treating you differently, and in a way that makes you grow up in a very, very quickly in a very particular way. And so once she took off her hijab, a very curious thing happened. She went back to catch up on all her late teens that she didn't get to have after she took on her hijab. And we suddenly found that we have a teenager in the house with all the, like an awesome teenager, but a teenager who is exploring herself, who is experimenting with clothing. Like for a couple of weeks, her clothing was getting shorter and shorter. And that's the girl who hasn't shown her legs to the world. Like those legs haven't seen a drop of sun for 10 years. There was funny hair colors. There was a questionable boyfriend. There was a period when we were so close, like she would talk to me about everything and we were analyzing, discussing every little thing about her life. There was a period when she would just not talk to us about anything at all. And this was a stay out of my room kind of a situation. There was a situation when she bumped my car and she handled it and we handled it as a family, which is insurance covered it and she paid for the deductible that the insurance, like we got a pretty much full teenage experience. Right now, the situation has kind of stabilized and we ended up surprisingly with the birth of my son, a family of 4. And this like awesome girl, I think she's approaching about 18, 19 right now emotionally. So she's looking into schools, she's taking programming classes, she's planning to apply for a master's degree in sometime in the fall. The story doesn't really have an end because it is still ongoing. I have to say, we didn't learn much about Islam. We did learn something about having a teenager in the house, and we feel like we worked through that pretty well. We have movie nights, we have family nights, we have game nights, and overall, this is not the experience that we thought we would end up having, but it actually turned out to be pretty cool. So I'm really hoping that she's still with us when the church opens its doors. I mean, we will have to kick her out of the house at some point, so she lives her life, gets her education, and does the whole grown-up thing. But right now it's great, and I'm hoping that when the church opens its doors, she's gonna come with us. Now our little surprising family of 4 is going to be able to participate in the whole shebang. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful story. Thank you so much, Irina. I had no idea where that story was going to go, and it went to some great places. Well, up next, we have someone who needs no introduction because it's Ian Garvie. And I want to say that you probably know that God created people because God loves stories. And Ian's going to tell us a story about 8 days in Turkey. Take it away, Ian.
Thank you, Richard. So my story takes place in the spring of 2006. I was a junior in college, and my campus job was the accompanist for the college women's chorus. It was a wonderful job, actually. I had it for 3 years, and it taught me more about choir, choral conducting, and accompanying than I learned in all of my college classes and grad school or anything. It was a fantastic experience. But in the spring of my junior year, I learned that the chorus was planning a concert tour in Turkey. And as the accompanist, and because it was my job, I was a staff person, my ticket was paid. So I was being treated to an 8-day trip through Turkey to play 5 concerts in 3 cities, and was looking forward to it. So the beginning of the trip was relatively uneventful, and I won't bore you with all the details. Landing at a surprisingly small airport in Ankara, and the visa process went smoothly. Our first night at the hotel went smoothly. One of the things I was absolutely surprised by in Turkey was the unbelievable hospitality and kindness of the people there. We were greeted by so many people and so many strangers with open arms and smiles and the best coffee I have ever had in my life. So the first concert and the first 2 days went uneventfully. And we finished up the concert in Ankara, and the following morning boarded our tour bus. So we had rented, the choir had rented a relatively large tour bus for this trip. We boarded the tour bus and started heading to our second city, which was Bursa. And this is the story of that day on the road to Bursa and the concert that night. So the trip started off without a hitch. Traveling on the E90 west over towards Bursa. It's about a 4.5-hour drive. With the tour bus and traffic, it was going to be longer. And through some of the most incredibly beautiful countryside I have ever seen in my life. And our first stop was for lunch at a very, very small village somewhere out in the middle of the Turkish countryside, where there was one restaurant in town, and it was a woman's house. And we were shown in to the main living room area where there were a number of cushions, and we were all invited to take a cushion and sit on the floor, and low tables were set out for us. And she proceeded to make us crepes. That was the only thing that the restaurant offered, with fresh goat's milk cheese and a number of greens, and they were incredibly delicious. But she was also the cook. Her children were the servers, and so she proceeded to sit in the middle of the living room with an open fire and a large iron pan, Her children brought out a bowl of crepe mix and all the toppings. And in the center of this circle of all 43 of us, she started making crepes, one at a time. It was amazingly fast. She threw the dough out, scraped it around, put the toppings in, rolled it up, tossed it on a plate, and one of her children would bring it to the next person in line. But making crepes for 43 people takes a while. And so we were there for 2 hours, I think, maybe 2.5 hours. One of the most delicious experiences I've had, but also one of the most amazing, watching her, the conversation, she was engaging us in conversation the whole time she was making crepes, asking us questions about where we were from and where we were going and how we were enjoying the country. So 2.5 hours later, and absolutely stuffed with some amazing crepes, we decided to head back on the road and head towards Bursa with a quick pit stop first. She directed us to the bathrooms, which were divided, and around the back of the house, there was an outdoor sort of enclosure with men on one door and women on the other. And we opened the door. I opened the door to the men's side, and there was a concrete squat toilet on the ground, which was open to the pasture behind. Certainly the most exposed restroom experience I have ever had. But after that, we boarded the bus again and kept rolling. And a couple hours later, we're heading into Bursa. And Bursa has a section of the city that is walled off. It's an older part of the city. And our concert was taking place in a university auditorium there in Bursa. And the driver of the bus either was not quite used to the size of the vehicle he was driving, or wasn't quite sure or aware of the low nature of the gate into the old part of the city, because he tried to start driving the bus through the gate where it got stuck. So we were, after a while on the road, we were coming up on our concert time, and we realized that we were going to be late if we stayed with the bus and tried to make our way to the auditorium. After a quick conversation with our guide, we had a Turkish guide with us the whole time. Our director decided it would be better if we get out and walk. And so, leaving the guide and the bus driver to get the bus unstuck, we proceeded to walk to the university, where we kept glancing at our watches more and more frequently, realizing that the concert, which was supposed to start at 7:30, was getting nearer and nearer. It was about 7 o'clock, and we still hadn't found the university. The doors to the concert hall were supposed to open at 7 o'clock. We finally found the university just after 7 and were ushered in as quickly as they could manage into the green room and into the concert hall. They were holding the concert doors, asking people to wait outside. We got out onto the stage, hoping, the original plan was to get there at 6:30 and have a half hour to warm up. We ended up having about 5 minutes, and I get to the piano, and the piano is a snow white piano that has me sitting with my hands about this high. And I tried to start playing it, and it was the stiffest piano I have ever played. Each key was like a concrete block. And I realized this was going to be unplayable. So I quickly asked, and meanwhile, the audience, you can hear people knocking on the doors in the back of the auditorium. We're frantically trying to warm up. And I called the director over and said, I can't play this piano. It's not going to work. So we called the concert organizer over, and I asked if he had a different piano. They didn't have another piano on campus. I asked if by any chance they had a stool, something taller that I could sit on, because the piano bench, even cranked all the way up as high as it went, was not tall enough. I couldn't play this concrete block of a piano like this. So I got one of the double bass stools that they had from backstage finally. And about 10 minutes before the concert started, I finally had something tall enough to sit on so that I could lean into the keys enough to sort of play this instrument. And then we had to leave the stage. And we jumped into the concert on almost no warm-up. The auditorium was packed, and I was playing the world's stiffest piano, sitting on a stool, almost standing completely. somehow managed to make my way through the whole concert. But it was definitely the strangest piano I've ever played. So after that night, we had a wonderful reception, and the rest of the tour went relatively smoothly. Our only other hiccup in the tour was in Istanbul when we were there for a couple days. We were touring the Blue Mosque. And for those of you who have been there, it is a gorgeous space with the most beautiful echoey sound that from the whispers most people don't speak, and if you do speak there, it's in a hushed tone. The reverence for the space is just unbelievable. You can't help but feel it when you walk in. Well, our director decided that it would be a great idea to start singing. So she brought the choir together, gave a pitch, and had us start singing, and immediately everyone who worked there started running over, and security guards came over. Apparently, we did not know that that was a big no-no in the mosque, and we were kicked out and unfortunately didn't finish our tour of the Blue Mosque. But the rest of the tour went well, and from that moment, I have always compared every piano that I play, because as you know, as a pianist, I can't travel with my instrument. So every concert that I play is on a different piano. Every time I accompany or play at a different church, it's on somebody else's instrument. And how the instrument is maintained, I don't know. How it might be set up, I don't know. But they all, in my mind, get compared to that white piano. And if it's better than that, then I'm happy to play it. So there's my story of the trip through Turkey and the infamous white piano.
Wow, fantastic. What a great story. I was really with you on those crepes. Would have loved to have been there for those. And you have a stunning background. I mean, who can come up with a brighter or more colorful background than you? Unbelievable. So we're almost at the halfway point in our stories. Story number 5 will be next, and we have about 10 stories. So I want to introduce Jeannie O'Farrell by saying that sometimes you need a story more than you need food, or the story kind of makes you forget that you want to eat something. Well, here is Jeannie with her story, School Days.
I'm going to tell you a story about something that happened in my 7th grade geography class, which is more than 60 years ago. And the story is about the teacher and about one of the students and about what we taught each other. We had a need for a 7th grade geography teacher and an 8th grade history teacher at the beginning of the school year of my 7th grade. The superintendent of schools was desperate, and he was driving home one day about 40 miles from our town, and he saw a man standing by the side of the road staring at an overturned motorcycle. He stopped, saw the man was okay, and began to talk to him and get his life story. And after about 10 minutes, he thought maybe this guy would be a good teacher. So he invites him home for the evening, and they have a nice family meal, and he gives him a place to sleep in the cabin behind the house. But by the end of the evening, Jake Reed has talked Mr. Robert Walken, age 27, from North Dakota, a farm there, into being a 7th grade geography teacher and an 8th grade history teacher. Mr. Walken came to us by way of Vietnam. He had been honorably discharged after 2 or 3 years of combat, and he was a combat veteran. And now he was off to see all the United States that we had on a motorcycle, had crashed it, and that's how he ended up by the side of the road. But he had some unorthodox ways of teaching. He was a little bit eccentric. He would stand on the desk in his bare feet and yell at us if we wouldn't be quiet. And if that didn't work, he'd get down and he'd pound on the desk with his shoes. And if that didn't work, sometimes he would just throw an eraser from the chalkboard and it would hit the wall in the back. A big cloud of dust would come out and get all over everybody. And that would stop us. One day he was teaching us about South America, and he had he was going around asking different people questions, and we were answering the best we could. And then he came to the guy sitting next to me, Billy Bob, who was a nice kid. He had a stutter, had a speech impediment, and so it was hard for him to get his words out. And he felt bad about it, and he was bullied about it. Well, this particular day, Mr. Walken encouraged Billy to answer the question, and Billy was having a really tough time just answering the question. And the answer to the question was the country Brazil. And Mr. Walken was slowly coaching him, and Billy finally got out, Brazil, and the bad boys who sit in the back laughed and jeered at him. And Mr. Walken, unlike his usual response was to yell at somebody, he just kept talking to Billy, kept his eyes fixed on Billy and said, Billy, now take your time. Remember to breathe slowly in, pause, out, pause, and think about the words you're going to say. And he very carefully coached Billy through this, like there was nobody else in the room. And Billy finally got out the word, and it was Brazil. And Billy's eyes got so big when he said this word, and he had this big grin on his face. And Mr. Walken said, I knew you knew the answer, and I knew you could do this, and you did it all yourself. And then he turned to us and said, what Billy just did was really, really brave. It's so hard for him to do something that's so easy for you. And some of you make fun of him for that. But Billy just showed you what a brave, courageous boy he is. And you know what else? Billy has a speech impediment. And now we all know it's not a secret anymore. And we can all help him. And then he said, now I want Billy to stand up, and we're going to give him a round of applause. And then Billy's going to say, thank you. And Billy stood up, and we all started to clap, and the bad boys were pounding on the desk and stomping their feet. And then we started to say, yay, Billy, go, Billy, you did a great job. And Billy stood there with a beautiful grin on his face and his eyes all lit up. He wasn't filled with shame for once. He had eyes that were smiling. He had tears of joy streaming down the sides of his face. He was so proud of what he'd done. And Mr. Walken said, see, I told you you could do it. It turns out Mr. Walken was not a real teacher. He wasn't certified or licensed. He was a speech therapist, and our county had no money for speech therapy. And he had been teaching. He had taken Billy on as a student and charged him no money. And Billy had improved enough over the month of school, over September, it was now October, to actually answer a question when he was asked one in class. He loved learning. He was now able to answer a question, and it gave him immense happiness. And Mr. Walken changed this young boy's life for the better, and I think forever. Here, Billy had an advocate in a somewhat eccentric male teacher, and he had a champion for him. And he got a full year of speech therapy for free, and he worked very hard at it. And we watched him blossom over the year. He just became his best self. And I think it had a lifelong impact on him. It really changed him for his life for the better. And us, I think it changed us too, because we had never seen anything like that. We had never seen someone give a name to a disability. We were initially appalled, and then I think we started to catch on. And that combination of kindness by Mr. Walken And that combined with his ability, his professional ability and skill to teach Billy to talk, to get some power over his stutter and his mispronunciation and be able to say the word Brazil was a major accomplishment for Billy. And there were so many more improvements we saw over the year. It was a wonderful experience. And I think a really beautiful one that I feel privileged to have witnessed and privileged to have. It changed me too in some way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. A beautiful story. And I think I feel privileged to now have heard it, because sometimes the best teachers can be found in the most unexpected places. It's not necessarily the training that goes into it. It's who the person is. And it sounds like your superintendent there managed to find a wonderful teacher there. So our next storyteller is Marian Melnick. She has a story to share called Pacific Coast Highway. So Marian, take it away.
I had to unmute myself. I miss traveling. It seems like a lot of people do, but I miss traveling. I love to travel. And I love my daughters. And when they were young, I wanted to give them experiences that I hadn't had when I was a child. Growing up, I had wonderful summer vacations. We lived in New York City. My parents rented a small house in rural Connecticut for 25 years. And our house was in a cluster of homes owned or rented by the same families who came year after year for the same 25 years. So the same 8 families, maybe 30 kids every summer, year after year. It was wonderful, wonderful times and wonderful memories. But what I didn't have as a child was a travel vacation. My parents had 7 children, and we squeezed the 9 of us into the 3 rows of a Volkswagen bus. And there's not a lot of room for anything else. So we didn't go on long road trips. And we didn't take an airplane vacation either. It was too expensive to buy tickets and hotel rooms and meals and sightseeing. Besides, we had the summer house. What I didn't have growing up was a travel vacation. When we, it wasn't until after college that I got to travel. I flew for the first time. I went to Mexico and the Caribbean. And then when I got married, the 2 of us went to Europe for our honeymoon, London, Paris, and Amsterdam. And we went again in future years, in other years. And then some vacations, we took long road trips. We went to Montreal, we went to Niagara Falls, we went to Toronto. One vacation we took by train, by Amtrak, across from New York to San Francisco, 3 nights and an overnight train. And then we moved to Boston and we had kids. And we still took long road trips, but now it was to go home to see family. We would be in the car, audiobooks. I would pass snacks and drinks over the back seat. There were a lot of bathroom stops. Our vacations had changed. My parents bought a farm in upstate New York to kind of replicate the rural Connecticut setting that we had as a child, as for my childhood. And in the early years with our kids, we endured these long road trips from Boston to spend the whole summer with my parents and my sister and her kids, with nephews and various cousins. But then when my parents died, the house got sold. And it was an end of an era. We would not be spending every summer vacation at the summer house. Then it occurred to me, we would not be spending every summer at the summer house. I could plan a vacation. And I did. I planned an epic vacation. I checked all my boxes. My kids had never flown before. Check. My kids and I had never seen the Grand Canyon or the San Francisco Bridge or so they'd never flown, they'd never seen the Grand Canyon, they'd never seen the Pacific Ocean. We would do all those things, check. But wait for it. I would do an RV vacation. I wanted to be an RV vacation. So we did. We flew from Boston to Las Vegas. It was our kids' first plane ride. We rented a car in Vegas and drove down that gaudy neon Vegas strip. Then we drove to Hoover Dam. And then we walked the rim of the Grand Canyon and we hiked Bryce Canyon and Zion National Park. And we drove the car back to Las Vegas and returned the rental car. And then we rented an RV. I loved being in that RV. It was big, it was beautiful, had a big, beautiful picture window. We got in the RV and we drove through the Death Valley to Los Angeles. We went to Disneyland. And then we drove north and we toured Hearst Castle. So there we were on the Pacific Coast Highway in an RV with a big picture window looking out onto the ocean. The Pacific Ocean. My husband was driving. I was sitting up front. I was looking back over my shoulder at my two daughters, and they were sitting playing cards in the dinette table in front of the window, and they were laughing. And I loved hearing them laugh and loved knowing that they were obviously enjoying themselves. And the late afternoon sun, the golden rays of the late afternoon sun glinted off the waves in the ocean. And I turned and I pointed and I said, "Look how beautiful." And my daughters stopped their card game and they turned their heads and they reached up and pulled down the shade. And they went back to their card game. It was all good. It was all good. So thank you for letting me share that memory, and may you all make many more. Thank you.
Wonderful story, Marian. Thank you so much. Really stimulates some memories of my own. Well, continuing with travel mode that we're in right now, which, you know, travel can inspire some of the best and some of the worst stories that we know. Here is Barry Kaye to tell a story about my trip to Texas.
Hi, everyone. This story was brought to mind by recent events in Texas. And I'd like to give a shout out to anybody in the audience from Texas. I know David Warner's out there. I'd skipped the graduation ceremony and it was time to get out of town. My friends Kuda and Hank picked me up in DC en route to Hank's hometown of Orange, Texas. Hank had spent the war years in the Navy, stationed here in Boston. He'd been a star athlete in high school, football, basketball, baseball, tall and confident. He had all the qualities that I lacked. We were an odd couple. I'd never been to Texas before. What did I know? The Lone Ranger and Tonto, Clint Eastwood and Rawhide, rollin', 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 keep them doggies rollin', Sky King and Penny, the Alamo where Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie fought the swarthy and barbaric Mexicans. For the more literate, there was the book Giant, that saga by Edna Ferber, and the Technicolor movie that followed. Dallas was still years away. We had what was called a drive-away car, a 1972 Ford Pinto that someone had paid us $300 to drive cross country. I would not have entrusted my car, if I'd owned one at the time, to this group. I don't know how many of you remember the Ford Pinto and its exploding gas tank, or know what the vibrations feel like when you got that Pinto up to its top speed of 90 miles an hour. There was no air conditioning and we were headed south, but the car was free and we didn't care if it didn't survive the trip. Over the Blue Ridge Highway in the Smokies across Tennessee and Arkansas we rode. We crossed the border at Texarkana. Not long after, I saw the blue lights and heard the siren. I had never seen a real Texas Ranger before, with the shiny boots and the military bearing, but I knew enough to be worried. He walked over to the car with slow, deliberate steps. Hank got out of the car so the officer wouldn't smell what was inside. Hank revved up his Texas accent. I'm real sorry, officer. I just got back from NAM and I haven't seen my mom and papa in ages. And, you know, I thought I'd never live to see them again. I guess I was going a little fast and I'm in too much of a hurry to get home. The Ranger looked at Kuda in the front seat, eyes glazed, looking like Carlos Castaneda. He raised his eyebrows. Oh, don't mind them. I picked them up in Nashville. They're musicians. They have to look that way to get work. You know how it is these days. But they're okay. The officer said, I'll look the other way this time, son. But slow down. I'm not the only Ranger on the road. Next one might not be so kindly. A few hours later, we entered Orange, which is north of Houston, near Beaumont and Port Arthur, where Janis Joplin came from. East Texas is flat, the kind of flat that I'd never seen before. There's no escaping the petrochemical smell of the thick orange-colored air. This was oil country. I'd worked my way through college as a messenger for one of those big DC law firms on K Street. There was a large stack of oil and gas magazines in my office. I expected to see gleaming stainless steel refineries and happy, well-paid roustabouts and petroleum engineers, like in the magazine. I was misinformed. Hank's house was a step up from the shacks where black people lived. His house was painted. His parents were thin and worn. They didn't say much, but I got the sense they weren't really thrilled to see me. I'd never slept in a redneck's home before. I didn't sleep well. Hank later told me that his parents had stayed awake the whole night, shotguns by their side. They thought that I was another Charles Manson. My wife, Catherine, will confirm that at the time there was some resemblance and need for concern. The night we arrived, we went out honky-tonking with Hank's friend Denny. Denny was a dentist in Houston, and Denny was packing. I asked him about the gun. He told me that Houston was a dangerous place. There were plenty of guns in Boston at the time, what with busing, the Winter Hill Gang, and the IRA, but I'd never seen a dentist with a gun. A couple of years later, I heard that Denny was dead, murdered. Guess he was right about Houston. The next day, Kuda and I headed out to California. It takes a full 24 hours to drive from one end of Texas to another, and you don't really comprehend just how big Texas is until you've driven across it. By the time we reached the New Mexico border, we'd eaten our first taco and seen our first Mexican Americans. This was a long way from Boston. Over the years, Hank would call me from time to time. For $10,000, I could get a share of an oil lease. Normally, only millionaires could get in on that kind of action. Chance of a lifetime. Then there were the real estate deals. I bobbed and weaved and told him I'd get back to him. Things didn't pan out so well for Hank. In time, he was reduced to appearing in bars in Austin doing animal imitations. He was good enough to get on David Letterman. I have a CD that someone will find someday when they sort through my drawers after I'm gone. Eventually, the booze and the cigarettes got to him, and he died a few years ago. I never really thanked him for introducing me to Texas. I really should have. As I approach the end of my life, I sometimes think of where I'd like to make my last stand. The Alamo seems like just the place, with my Bowie knife in my hand and my Davy Crockett coonskin hat on my head.
Thank you, Barry. What a beautiful picture. What a variety of images there. That's just wonderful. So Sean Coyne, the author and storytelling coach, says, whether you know it or not, your desire to write and to tell stories comes from the urge not just to be creative, it's a need, one every human being on earth has, to help others. A well-told story is a gift to the reader or listener or viewer because it teaches them how to confront their own discomforts. So, helping us confront discomforts or memories or hopes or dreams, here's Richard Waring, who has a story he's calling the Berkshire Vista Resort. Richard, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Ian. Yes, a very apropos introduction. Thank you very much. Well, I have this friend, Walter, and we're very good friends. He and I have gone on trips up mountains in the White Mountains with our kids and also just by ourselves or with partners. And he's an Eagle Scout, so I feel comfortable. I was never in the Scouts, but my dad was a Scout, Eagle Scout. My dad's father was an Eagle Scout and Scout Master. So I like to hang around with Eagle Scouts, so I can glean by osmosis and not have to really work too hard at it. And so at one point I found myself living with Walter. And so we decided to go to the Tanglewood, to hear the music in the summer. And I had been observing that he was subscribing to a magazine called The Naturist. And it kind of comes from a German tradition of going into nature and just kind of dropping your clothes and proceeding au naturel to your destination. And this made sense. It might even have been some of his ancestors, because Walter's last name is Stein. So, I took that in stride. So some of the times we would go to October Mountain camping site and put up our tents and so forth. But this particular year, Walter said, why don't we go to the Berkshire Vista Resort? Clothing optional. And, I had a lot of trust in this guy. He's one of my best buddies. And so I was like, okay, yeah, sounds good. So we get ready and we pack. We don't need to pack too many clothes, I guess. And we go out there. And sure enough, we come up to the road and up the hill, and there's this big metal gate barring our way, but we put in the right code and it opens and we proceed in, and there's a sign that says, beyond this point, clothing is optional. And so we go in, and first thing I kind of recognize is that bodies come in all shapes and sizes. And there's very little you can do to hide that fact when you're not wearing clothes. And so I saw a rather large man playing bocce as we were entering the office to secure our campsite. And the thing about this place is that it's not just come and go campers who have the privilege of walking around without clothes, but it's an established nudist colony that has trailers, and they are there, most of the summer. And they have al fresco barbecues and, sausage and meatballs and casseroles and all kinds of stuff. So Walter and I go in there, and we had heard that you could get a discount if you were a couple. So we thought, yeah, we're a couple. So Walter made an attempt, and they said, no, you're not a couple. I don't know how they figured that out, but we had to pay the full price. So we went to the campsite and set up the tent. And first thing Walter did was he like took off all his clothes. I mean, I hadn't even seen this when we lived together, So I did likewise. And then, it gets a little challenging when you're zipping the fly to the tent. You don't want to, zip anything accidentally. So we went outside, and Walter wanted to play Frisbee. So, okay, yeah. We can kind of cool our jets and, just kind of be real cool and casual, throwing Frisbee. And that was a lot of fun. And then later, Walter said, well, now that we're kind of hot and sweaty, let's go to the pool. So we went down to the pool, and at the pool, there was like an entire family there, young boy and girl and parents. And there was pretty lively action. And I was very intent on getting into the water as fast as I could, so that at least I would have, that shimmery meniscus of water to cover myself. I was very self-conscious. And while I was in there, a guy came in, and he was dressed only in a pair of white socks, and they made fun of him. It's like, what's the deal? White socks, that's not covering anything. And he's like, well, the gravel and the stones and stuff. So, but there was this lively kind of, poking fun at one another, and everything was so casual. So toward the time when we were about to go to Tanglewood, some of the folks said, are you going to the new dance tonight? And, we discussed this, but basically, we wanted to go hear the concert. And we knew that there was going to be a stark contrast between where we were and going to the concert, where we wanted to be fully clothed, have no doubt. So we went to the concert, and no one in the audience knew what we had been up to. But we had smiles on our faces. And then we got back, and it was nighttime. So pretty much the cover of night protected us. And then the next morning, as we were getting ready to depart, I went down to the drinking fountain to get some water for our trip. And while I was getting to the drinking fountain, I had to pass an outdoor open shower. And there was a woman there in the shower, her back to me. And so I just discreetly filled my bottle, but then she began to talk to me. And so it was kind of awkward. I didn't know what to do. I mean, usually you turn and you face the person, but this was a naked woman. So I did my best to reservedly look around the corner, and are you talking to me? And she said, yeah, what do you, I know you're kind of new here, and was wondering what you thought of the place. And so she comes out of the shower, and I'm like, oh, good. She's got a towel. So she comes out with a towel, and then she takes the towel, the one bit of textile that she has on her, and she wraps it around her head, to dry the hair. And I'm like, okay, the full Monty, here we go. And so as a good, undercover journalist, I suppose, I figured I got to ask her some questions. So I was like, what do you guys do in the wintertime? And she said, oh, we do indoor nude bowling and nude darts, things like that. And it's really, we had a little problem back a ways because there was a new owner. And when he showed up thinking he had a good, tax break situation here, he discovered that none of us were wearing clothes, and he didn't like that. He said, put your clothes on. And we said, no, we don't want to, because this is what we do. And if you tell us to put our clothes on, you're not going to have any business. So consequently, the owner is very easy to identify. He's really the only one there wearing clothes. Everyone else is, following suit with the colony. So finally, I wanted to kind of wrap up my conversation, and I said, so do you bring your kids here? She said, oh no. See, this is, we're getting away from it all. No children, no grandchildren. The grandchildren always ask, oh, Granny, can we go camping with you? And she would say, oh no, there are bears everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So we have two more stories for the evening. And the first one is Nicole Bernstein, who is going to tell us a story about the Wandering Brits. So Nicole, take it away.
Once upon a time, long ago, though not as far back as when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, however, long ago, I was 10 years old. This is when this story, a real one, happened in Paris, of course. Imagine, August 1950, to be precise, before most of you were born. Unless one is absolutely forced to do so, no Parisian in their right mind would ever stay in Paris in August. The weather is terribly hot, burning hot, in fact, and sticky. And all the good stores are closed. It's very hard to find a boulangerie, a pastry shop. It's only the tourists who go there. Paris at that time is populated by hordes of tourists. And in 1950, the hordes were mostly British. Whole families came to visit the sites, but I suspect also to finally be able to eat what they wanted, but couldn't, because at home, the food was unavailable still in England due to rationing. In France, which was considered at the time the breadbasket of Europe, food was plentiful and quite good. That summer, my family was stuck in Paris, however, because my mother had to have some serious surgery. So on that particular day, dutifully, my grandfather, grandmother, and I, we traipsed about and went to visit my mother in the private hospital where the operation had taken place. Well, it wasn't very pleasant, I'll tell you, either for her or for anybody else. There was no air conditioning at that time. There still isn't, actually, most of the time, most of the places. She was resting in bed. The white sheets were in stark contrast with her then brown skin and black hair. I was blinded by the bright sun hitting the walls and the rest of the whiteness of the room, and only saw with my whole being the golden, shiny, delicious looking pitcher of lemonade right on the little night table next to her. Its surface was sweating small diamonds projected on the night table next to the bed. All I wanted was a glass of lemonade. I was dying of thirst all of a sudden. I whispered my wish to my grandmother. Time to go, she declared. The small private hospital was located near the Invalides, the military hospital dating back to Louis XIV. And the surrounding buildings, even now, are still dating back to ancient times. Therefore, they're tall and tall enough so at least one side of the street provides shade. So we could avoid roasting under the ruthless summer sun. After I declined my grandmother's offer of a croissant, which surely wouldn't replace a glass of lemonade, my grandmother decided that we should visit Napoleon's tomb. My cool drink could wait, because, as she put it, it would be a shame to be so near and not visit this historical site. I was flabbergasted. No Parisian ever visited the historical sites. Only when we brought in foreigners, people from the countryside, peasants. but she insisted. However, to enter the big gilded dome of the Invalides, you had first to get out of the shade and walk and get sweaty in the torrid sun. That's not enough. Then you have to cross the esplanade. My sandals provided little comfort from the hot, dusty, dry gravel. And I was mostly concentrating on not getting pebbles between my toes, and I certainly wasn't looking at the beautiful gilded dome and the various buildings they were explaining about to me. I was just too uncomfortable. Before we reached the entrance, we were accosted by a British family who had probably just admired the object of our destination. It's always been a big, big surprise for me to realize how interested in Napoleon the British are. Why? I have absolutely no clue. They admire him and they hate him at the same time. I don't understand, but it doesn't really matter. The daughter and I stared at each other. We could have been sisters, same height, same pleated skirt, same white blouse, and probably same thirst. The father addressed my grandfather in English. Could you please tell me how to go to? And he pointed to a piece of paper with an address. Immediately, Grand-Père turned to me. You speak English? Answer him. I had never ventured in this part of Paris and honestly had absolutely no clue where I was, except in front of that dome. Twice I told my grandfather, I don't know. Can you tell me? And I will translate. Alas, he didn't want to hear and became quite angry, insisting I was rude not to help strangers. So, fearing he might slap me, which had never happened before, I don't know why I was afraid, but you never know. I took a deep breath and pointed, explaining in English. Hey, I speak English. You take the first right, then, and then the second left, and then the third left again, and so forth. All the while looking by the side of my glasses, sunglasses, to see my grandfather's face. When he appeared sufficiently satisfied, I stopped the directions. The family left us, thanking us profusely. For all I know, they may have been wandering about in Paris for ages. I've had visions of their aging, the father walking around with a cane and a beard, and the children all grown up, wandering aimlessly like Charlie in the MTA.
Very good.
Thank you, Nicole, and so wonderful to see your background. Hopefully we can be there again next year. Wonderful story. Well, last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Sheila Kavanaugh, who is the only one that I know among us who has actually been on the NPR radio show, The Moth Hour. Here's Sheila Kavanaugh with a story she's calling Extending the Web of Human Connection.
Hi, everybody. I'm the disembodied head here. I hope you can hear me. So this story takes place in the fall of 2017. I was a field education student in chaplaincy at the Faulkner Hospital in Boston. I had decided to go to divinity school after having a long career in the consulting world. So I was rather new at this. We were in training, but the training consisted of being flung out onto the units of a hospital. And I remember my supervisor pushing me out of the proverbial nest and saying, just go knock on doors. You're a chaplain now, or you're training to be, and you need to get comfortable with people. And so I nervously went up to one of the units and took a deep breath and knocked on one of the doors, and a very tiny, very humble gentleman welcomed me into his room. And I felt like I could hold him in the palm of my hand. He was so small. And so I introduced myself, and his name was Theodore. And I asked him, you know, how would you like to be addressed? And he said, you can call me Ted. And so as we started chatting, almost like immediately, I felt like I was in the presence of a mystic. Pearls of wisdom were just flowing from his lips. And I tentatively asked him if he were a rabbi. And he said yes. And I went into like imposter syndrome. I thought, oh my gosh, how can I be ministering to a rabbi? What can I possibly say to this man to alleviate his suffering or make him feel better? And I wanted to actually jump in the bed and trade places. And I felt like the dry parts of my body, like my underarms, become soaked. And the moist part of my body, like my tongue, became very dry. And I think, oh my gosh, how am I going to handle this? And so when he said, I'm a rabbi, when I said, are you a rabbi? He said, yes. And then he said, you are too. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm Irish Catholic. I can't even become ordained in my own faith. And now I'm a rabbi. And he said, well, a rabbi is a teacher, and we're here to teach each other. And as he spoke, I felt like I wanted to write down what he was saying. And that's a big no-no in chaplaincy. You're never supposed to write down what the patient says. And so I said, can I break one of the rules? And he said, what's that? I said, I'd love to just write down what you're saying, because I would love to keep it with me as I travel this journey called life. And he was saying things like, the seeds of a miracle are planted when two souls meet. He told me the heart lives more than one life. To love is to will the good of the other. And so I was writing these things down, and inevitably our visit ended. And one of the heartbreaking elements of my new job is that we have to say goodbye to souls we meet and might have a moment of transcendence with. And so I said goodbye to Rabbi Ted, and he told me, call me Ted. And I thought I'd probably never see him again, but I did take a few notes to keep with me. Well, about a year later, I was reassigned to Hebrew Senior Life across the street from the Faulkner. And I was still in training, still knocking on doors, doing rounds. I knocked on a random door once again, and a familiar voice welcomed me in. And who was it? It was Rabbi Ted. And he came at just the right moment in my life, because my parents at that time were both actively dying. And coincidentally, they were residents in the same facility. They were in the residential part of Hebrew Senior Life. And I had moved them there because I wanted to be with them while I was training, so I could see them every day. And so I confessed to Rabbi Ted that my parents were dying, and I was deeply fearful of what life might be like in their absence. And he said, you will feel your parents' love more intensely after death than you do now. And I can honestly say that carried me through my own parents' death. My mom died not long after that, and my father died 50 days later. And but for Rabbi Ted's wisdom and counsel, I don't think I would have coped as well. Well, Rabbi Ted once again was discharged. And again, I was a little bit heartbroken. I was still at the Faulkner working both jobs. And who do I come across? Once again, it's Rabbi Ted. I said, this is ridiculous. I'm going to break another rule and become friends with you. Now, we're never supposed to keep in touch with patients. Once they get discharged, that's it. And I said, but this is meant to be. And I found out he was living at Traditions, an assisted living facility in Dead of Mass. And so I would visit him on the random weekend. And then COVID struck. And when I visited Rabbi Ted at Traditions, we had to only visit outside, and we were 6 feet apart with a huge hedge in between us. And he could barely hear. We were both wearing masks. I could, I wanted to hear from him. He couldn't hear me. So we would just gaze at each other and keep our eye contact very steady and console ourselves just by looking at each other and holding us in each other's hearts. Well, after that visit in July, I got a phone call from Ted's healthcare proxy. He had no family. And his healthcare proxy said he's now at the Faulkner and he's very sick. And I said, I had since moved on to the Brigham. And I said, I won't be able to visit him because of COVID. There are no visitors. And she said, I am going to call the hospital and tell them that you are his clergy. Again, I can't believe this is happening to me. I still feel like an imposter. And now I am the clergy to a rabbi. And so I went to the Faulkner. They invited me in as Ted's clergy. He was no longer communicative. He was in bed, intubated, and I remember caressing his arms and holding his fragile hands in mine. And I thought, what can I offer this wise man, this prophet who entered my life and has consoled me, encouraged me, uplifted me? And so I had my cell phone with me. The only thing that I could think to do, because I understand hearing is the last sense to go, was to look up the priestly blessing in Hebrew. And so I took the priestly blessing on my phone and I placed it by Ted's ear and I played it, and I could see him sort of moving gently with the song. And it was the most uplifting, transcendent experience I've had in chaplaincy. Well, he died 2 days later. Again, I got a phone call and I was invited to give the eulogy at his funeral. I still shiver when I think of that because again, I felt he was at the level of the prophet Isaiah. And I couldn't believe that I was invited to give the eulogy at this wise man's funeral, this beloved rabbi. It was one of the greatest honors of my life. The funeral was outside in Sharon, Mass. And so I drove down feeling very nervous, feeling totally intimidated by what I might find because I imagined other rabbis in the audience and other devout Jewish brethren. But I got up and gave the rabbi, and then I was invited to shovel the rocks to put them on Rabbi Ted's grave. And I was invited to give that twice. You do it once with the shovel up and then once with the shovel downward. And I was told that that's one of the highest you can offer a person because there's no possibility of repayment. And so Ted was buried under the large oak tree, and I shoveled the rocks over his grave. And as he told me, the heart lives more than one life. The seeds of a miracle are planted when two souls meet. To love is to will the good of the other. And he also told me, and this is how I would like to leave it with all of you, we have what we seek. It is there all the time. We simply need the patience to discover it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Sheila. And so that concludes the storytelling evening. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to all of our storytellers. You have shared moments that we will remember and treasure. So thank you all so much for being willing to open yourselves up and share those moments